People all over the world think of Texas as being larger than life, and we encourage that kind of thinking. Big oil, longhorns, tall cowboys, and big hats. Here in Texas, we laugh about the stereotypes, but we also know them when we see them. A trip to West Texas confirms a lot of Hollywood images of Texas, particularly the Big Bend area. It redefines bigness. As a matter of fact, Brewster County, which includes about half the Big Bend region, is larger than the state of Connecticut. The size of the country and the harsh climate define the character of the people that live and ranch there. It is vast country. It's rough country. And it's populated with some of the most rugged individuals you'll ever meet and some of the most kind-hearted. Hallie Crawford Stillwell was such a person. In 1910, when she was just a girl, she came to West Texas with her family in a covered wagon. In time, she became a school teacher and soon married a rancher, Roy Stillwell. Together, they raised 3 children and countless cattle on their remote ranch located on some of the most unforgiving land in the state. Roy Stillwell died in an accident in 1948. His truck overturned as he was hauling a load of hay from town. As Texas entered one of its worst droughts on record, Hallie and her grown children had to keep the ranch going alone. I met Hallie in 1991 on my way from a rafting trip on the Rio Grande River. A few years later, I had the honor of inducting her into the Texas Women's Hall of Fame. Hallie Stillwell was a unique woman. She was a rancher, a writer, and a justice of the peace. As you'll see, Hallie was also an optimist. Like all ranchers, she had to be. It was a matter of survival.
The life of a West Texas cattle rancher. Perhaps there's no other vocation surrounded with more romance and mythos. A life of wide open spaces, of being one with the country, a freedom of spirit that cannot be tamed. How much of this idyllic lifestyle exists today, or just how idyllic it ever was, is open to debate, but certainly times have changed. Instead of working cattle on horseback, the cowboy of today more than likely works them from a pickup truck. The once wide open spaces are becoming increasingly smaller fenced enclosures, and the modern rancher seems less likely to be in the fresh air of the free range than downwind of a feedlot. Fact is, independent ranchers like those who settled far western Texas a century ago seem to be a vanishing breed, and those who have hung on to their land and continued ranching have seen their way of life altered dramatically. While time has brought profound changes to ranching and to other facets of life here, it is remarkable that in many ways, life in the area has also remained the same. The Bend has always been a place where borders have meant little, where all is overwhelmed by the vast expanses and inhospitable environment. Tucked away in the elbow curve of the Rio Grande, the Big Bend region of West Texas has always been a no-man's land of sorts, a perpetual frontier. And this isolation had an allure for those who came to the area, from bandits and smugglers to ranchers and fortune seekers. But even before these early inhabitants arrived, The hard land of the Big Bend was home to Spanish explorers and prehistoric Native Americans. Some believe the first nomadic people were here as early as 10,000 BC, and permanent habitation in some areas dates back as much as 7,000 years. The first European through the area was very possibly Spanish explorer Cabeza de Vaca in the 1530s. But for the earliest visitors, the Big Bend was an obstacle to, rather than the object of, their expeditions. By the late 1700s, the Spanish had established a few missions and military outposts along the Rio Grande, but they could never be fully protected against invading Comanches and Apaches. Under Mexican rule, in the early 19th century, Indian raids through the Big Bend and into present-day northern Mexico remained common. And after Texas became a part of the United States in the 1840s, Indian raids persisted until the 1880s, when arrival of the Southern Pacific Railroad, along with increased military presence, facilitated large-scale settlement of the area. Sheep and cattle ranchers in search of ungrazed land west of the Pecos were among the first off the train. By the turn of the century, there were well over 100 registered brands in Brewster County. Since this time, the Stillwell name has been a familiar one in the Big Bend. While they may never have been as well known as the largest Big Bend ranchers, such as the Gage, Cokernot, and Combs families, today there is still a Stillwell crossing on the Rio Grande, as well as Stillwell Mountain and Canyon. The Stillwell family has been raising cattle in the region for 4 generations, and over that time, Hallie Stillwell and her children, Dady, Guy, and son, managed to survive as a ranching family. Hallie's life was anything but easy, yet one gets the feeling that she would have had it no other way. At age 97, Hallie spoke about the early years spent with her husband Roy in their one-room ranch house.
I came down here before I married him and saw the ranch and saw where he lived. And I knew what I was getting into. But as they say, love is blind.
Well, my father was raised down across the river down here. His father took him down there when he was 3 years old, and he stayed till he was grown. And then he came over here and homesteaded. We're 22 miles from the border.
He had about 22,000 acres, and then we had a lot of free land, a lot of land that no one else used. We had over here on the Maravillas where we made our home, and then we had the Dove Mountain country, which was 10 miles away.
And when I was a kid, we had to ride from the ranch here plumb to the other side those. We'd leave early in the morning and be gone all day, doctoring worms, looking at the cattle, and then come in late in the evening. You can see a trail comes off that mountain over there, off where them bluffs are. That's where we usually came off. It was a long, hard trip, and then the roundup over there was no place to stay. Well, there's 2 old shacks over there, but usually had to get there and heat the water on the stove and pour it through the cracks in the floor to get the rattlesnakes to calm down and the rats.
I had to ride with the men. I couldn't be left there at the house by myself. It was too dangerous. You didn't know when there'd be some Mexican bandit or somebody come by. So in those days, you had to ride every day looking after the cattle.
Well, there was lots of ranch women that done the same thing here, and some of them were really good, even at roping and riding horses, you know. I know my daddy talked about one that lived over here in the Rosasias. It was he said she made a better hand than a lot of the men did. So there was lots of women that rode right with the men and worked cattle and branded and everything.
I wasn't looking for an easy life. My father had been a rancher, and also a merchant. And I knew what ranch life was all about.
And the ranching life was not about comfort. Long days were spent in the saddle, through rainstorm and dust storm, through blistering heat and freezing cold. It was a life of few accommodations.
This is the first bedroom that you added on to the old
we
original.
first just had the kitchen, and
Slept in a bedroll.
and we spread a bedroll out on the floor at night.
It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer in the house.
Yeah, it's about like it was.
But over time, year by year, the Stillwells afforded some conveniences. A sink, a cook stove, a bedroom, then two, and eventually a bathroom, and even a refrigerator.
And the table was in the middle.
Yeah, the table was right along here. Living didn't require so many things in those days. I don't know that it would have paid for the things that we have now. Roy didn't want any improvements in the house. He thought everything was just great like they were. He and the cowboys, they got along fine, but he said I was never satisfied. I always wanted something else. As the children came along, we needed to add more room and have more things. And I wanted to make life comfortable and live like civilized people. He was content. I used to tell him, I said, I realized the happiest days of your life was when you lived under a hackberry tree, and you can just move out to that hackberry tree over there. But I need things to make it more comfortable for me and the children. But he had always come around and enjoyed the things that we had really more than I did.
The comforts were few and far between, however, and hardships plentiful. Droughts were problematic, profits slim, and the distances and isolation created their own sets of problems. Being so far from the nearest town and rail shipping point for cattle meant roundups and cattle drives and required a great deal of cooperation among the ranchers.
A long time ago when these corrals were made, everybody's cattle run together, and they'd have to round them up and separate. Each man, owner would cut his herd out, and the other ones cut theirs out.
All the ranchers around here, their cattle mixed, and of course for one work, they all got together and worked their cattle together and separated their own cattle out of the other herds and stuff like that, you know.
The methods of working cattle on unfenced open range from horseback were founded in Spanish ranching traditions. Broad-brimmed hats, leather chaps and boots, lariats or lassos were practical tools for the rancher of the American West and were quickly adopted, along with the practices of ear clipping and branding cattle for identification.
Oh, you had to brand them. Neighbors would brand them and take them to market. Big ranchers, wealthy ones that come from San Antonio or someplace, they had money and could fence their country up. But the natives down here, they all poor.
Regardless of their financial status, all ranchers depended on the railroad to connect them with the distant cities where their herds could be sold.
Oh yes, couldn't have done without the railroad. That's the way we sent our cattle to market. We sent them to the market in San Antonio.
Well, it was pretty important then because we didn't have trailer trucks like we have now to transport your cattle, so we had to ship them on the rail.
It's 46 miles up to Marathon, and we shipped at Marathon.
Yeah, it took us 3.5 days, I believe it was, to drive a herd from here to the marathon. That was pretty hard work, real hard. So when the sun went down, you was ready to get into bed.
Living in West Texas seems to affect one's sense of space. Far becomes near, and vast, small.
It's a small ranch. We have neighbors with 80,000 acres or 100,000. It's not uncommon for big ranches down here. We're not too far away. 10 or 15 miles to our nearest neighbors. But we don't think anything about traveling. We go 76 miles to get our groceries. That's one way.
While ranching may have been possible at a distance from town, certain needs required that the Stillwells be closer. One of those was giving their family an education.
Yeah, I could maintain a home in Marathon to send the children to school. And on weekends and holidays, we'd come to the ranch and then go back in for school. And Roy and I both were determined to give an education to the children. We felt like that was a necessity, which it was. And I have no regrets for having sacrificed for that purpose.
Hallie's interest in education at this early stage was due in part to the fact that teaching, not ranching, had brought her to the border initially.
I had gotten a teacher's certificate, and I had younger brothers and sisters that had to be educated, and I felt like that I should get out on my own and help my parents educate the younger children. And so I got this job teaching down in Presidio, and it paid $75 a month, which was good pay that day and time for teachers just starting out. I felt like I was in hog heaven and rich, and I got my first check for $75. Pancho Villa was raiding across the river and threatening to come to Presidio. Many times in the night, the commanding officer would come down and make us teachers go up to the soldier camp for protection. And of course, I wasn't afraid. I didn't think that was necessary, but my father said, "Daughter, you're not brave, you just don't have any sense."
At this point in time, 1916, the Rio Grande border was not a particularly safe place for a young woman to be. Mexico had been caught up in revolution since 1910, and Pancho Villa, who had once been supported by the U.S. government, now resorted to raiding across the river for food and supplies. Mexican revolutionaries and American outlaws alike took advantage of the vulnerability of the almost impossible-to-defend borderlands. The U.S. by this time was behind President Carranza, hoping he could bring the revolution to an end. But for residents along the Rio Grande, things grew less and less stable. Outlaws like Chico Cano raided ranches, towns, and settlements on both sides of the river. and raids were often attributed to Pancho Villa whether he was involved or not. Attacks on Glen Springs, Boquillas, Bright Ranch, and other locations kept fear in the hearts of Big Bend residents. But eventually, with more U.S. troops and settlers in the area, and the death of many an outlaw and innocent, by the 1920s, the bloodiest years of the Big Bend had passed. During the Prohibition era, the Big Bend region became a haven for a new breed of outlaws, liquor smugglers. Contrabandistas had always operated around the U.S.-Mexico border. Before smuggling liquor was profitable, sneaking horses and cattle across the river to avoid import duties was common, and U.S. goods were often smuggled in the other direction to be sold in Mexico, an activity which persists to this day.
Well, this is the contrabando that's going from Texas into Mexico instead of coming out of Mexico into Texas. They're hauling all of this frozen chicken, clothes, tires, used furniture, and things into Mexico. They go through this port of entry because they don't have to pay anything but Mordido. It's not a regular port of entry. And they hole up here while when the road's not clear. They stay here sometimes 2 or 3 days. And I've had them stay up to 4 days waiting for the road to clear down in Mexico. And they get word. It's they don't use the mirrors anymore, but they have a grapevine system that they know what's going on down in Mexico. They know when the policia or the soldados are on the road. And the customs, they have no problem with the customs at the bridge because they just pay a bribe, Mordido.
Very similar to the trafficking of today, smuggling the contraband of Prohibition times, liquor such as tequila and mezcal, distilled from native plants, required a widespread network. The Big Bend towns of Alpine, Marathon, and Marfa were key points for the illegal importation of Mexican liquor into the U.S., which peaked just before the repeal of Prohibition in 1933. In the year 1931, there were 500 pack mules abandoned on Marfa's streets, the animals, once they had carried their loads, being more of a liability than an asset to the returning smugglers. Although the 30s brought tamer times to the Big Bend, they also brought more hardship for ranchers across the southwest and southern plains. Severe drought, coupled with lower beef demand during the Depression, led to a crisis situation. With so many cattle too weak to get to market, and not much of a market for those that could get there, the government stepped in to save ranchers. First through loans from the Regional Agricultural Credit Corporation, and eventually through more drastic measures.
They ordered us to kill so many cattle, a certain percent. And that was a sad day. And we rounded up our cattle and held them down in the creek against an embankment, and the government men came out with their guns and shot them down.
Well, we shot ours down here in the creeks, and we got a couple dollars or $3 a head for them. The ones that make it to market, they would take them. We got $20 for them. But it saved, it helped out.
Killed them down here thinking the creek would run and wash them away, but the creek didn't run for 2 or 3 years.
It was a quicker way for the cattle to die than to starve to death. I had to look at it like that.
They kill lots of sheep on the sheep ranches around here. Well, cows. He was terrible.
During these Depression years, the Stillwells and many other ranching families were forced to supplement cattle production with other sources of income. The drive to survive led to some unusual money-making ventures for the family, but most importantly, it allowed them to stay on the ranch.
It's where our roots are. And it's all Guy knows. He's been here all of his life. Of course, I left and went to college and then taught school. And Son left when he went to World War II. And then when he came back, he realized that he needed to get into something else to make a living, and he started a construction company. But Guy has stayed here and helped Mama hang on to the ranch.
At that time, the Soil Conservation was doing lots of work on all the ranches, you know, and so we got a bulldozer and a camping outfit. That's about all we had, was a bulldozer and a pickup and a barrel of fuel and a chuck box. So we didn't have no trailer houses or anything following us around. And that's the way we built these tanks and things. We just camped till we finished one and then moved to the next one and camp out.
He put in a wax factory. We had a lot of candelia, and the price of wax had gone up, and so we started making wax. And we made good money out of that.
Yes, that's right after the war when we came back. Wax was pretty good price then, and there was lots of it because they hadn't worked it in years. And at that time, we could get wet men, you know, from Mexico to work it. So, and we had to get burros and get set up with our acid to use and wax to make the wax. And we kind of had a commissary too, because the only way you could keep the men on the job was to make them spend all the money they could, or they'd go home if they got some money ahead.
Roy was a cowman. He didn't take any part in it. He just let me and Son struggle with it. He enjoyed the money we made. But they got to where they could buy that wax from South America cheaper than we could make it here. And every time I got something going real good, they could do it cheaper someplace else.
When the land itself would not provide in food and water for the cattle or wax-making plants, the Stillwells learned to cater to the needs of others in the area. Hallie's business ventures ranged from running a beauty shop out of her home in Marathon to selling firewood to the Big Bend National Park. Hallie was a justice of the peace, an author, and newspaper columnist. And since the 50s, operated the Stillwell store and RV park. Mining activities across the river in La Linda meant a steady flow of customers for a gas station and store, at least until the town began to go the way of Terlingua, Studi Butte, and many other mining settlements in the Big Bend.
We used to have lots of business when the mines were down here, and they had La Linda was in production. They had the plant down there, and there were about 350 people, and they spent a lot of money in the store. But then they devaluated the peso, and it began to get harder for the people. And then the plant closed, and the people all moved.
Even though the region continues to hold a variety of mineral resources from fluorspar to cinnabar, its isolation has always interfered with mines being profitable over the long term. These company towns turned ghost towns, scattered across the area, are stark reminders of how difficult a place the Big Bend remains to make a living, or to simply survive. Of all developments in the region since the railroad, certainly nothing has been more responsible for bringing visitors to the Big Bend than the arrival of the Big Bend National Park in 1944. Although a smaller state park preceded it by 10 years, only its national park status led to the infrastructure of surveyed roads, reliable water supplies, electricity, and other such amenities that made the area accessible to people from the outside world.
Early 50s, when they put electricity to the Big Bend National Park, then we tied on and got electricity. And one of my younger brothers said to Hallie, said, we can't afford electricity. And Hallie said, well, we can't afford not to have electricity. So we've had electricity ever since. Oh, electricity is the main thing, and the paved roads. We can go to Marathon in, say, 45 minutes, and it used to take 3 or 4 hours when the roads weren't paved.
While the park brought improvements to the area, ranchers have always viewed it with some ambivalence.
When the people came down from Washington looking over the area and fixing to put the park in, they came over to see us. And I remember we sat out under the arbor, and I served them iced tea. And they told Roy that they'd like to look over the ranch. And he said, no way. Mm-mm. He says, I don't have anything to show. And after he left, I said, why wouldn't you show those men what we have? We have this beautiful canyon. We have a lot of interesting things on our place. He said, let me tell you something. I don't want to give up my ranch. I don't want them to see what we have, and they'd incorporate this into the park. And he was smart.
A lot of people are going. All the people that ranched in the park are all going. In Black Gap, it's a wildlife refuge, just one man down there.
The tourist business has helped the country all right. Of course, a lot of ranchers had to sell out of the park and move out, and that was a bad thing about it. They'd been there always, and a lot of them didn't, the older ones just up and died, They just was disappointed so in it.
Well, that was the saddest thing. 2 of them that I know died, the men died with broken hearts. The Homer Wilsons and the Burnhams, Whitey Burnham. And that was the worst thing about the park. But it brings lots of tourists, and that's what we're here for right now, is tourism. So we help them and they help us. We all work together down here.
I was all for the park. I felt like it was beautiful and it needed to be shared with the world. But I hated to see my friends, my ranch neighbors, have to give up their homes. So I had mixed feelings.
Now we get a lot of varmints out of there, coyotes and panther and stuff like that, which is uncontrollable.
Panthers go where there's sheep or goats or more game. So we're not bothered too much. Have a few coyotes. Now, I haven't seen a bobcat in a long time. The trappers about cleaned them out.
There used to be a lot of sheep down here. Too many coyotes and stuff, they really... One coyote can put a sheep man practically out of business. Used to, you could kill a panther, you took it to town on the front end of your car and showed it off. Nowadays, you don't say nothing about it.
While wildlife managers and ranchers may never fully agree on the balance between natural restoration and human activities in the area, They seem to agree that the Big Bend National Park, as well as the nearby Big Bend Ranch State Park and Black Gap Wildlife Management Area, protect something well worth saving. And after a look around, one has no doubt that the conservation is working. In the park, grasses have returned to land once barren from overgrazing. Black bears, deer, mountain lions, eagles, and herds of antelope all thrive in the parkland. And almost as a consolation prize for the residents still trying to make a living in the Big Bend, all of this renewed habitat has drawn one other form of wildlife, the tourist.
Look at that map.
Today, Big Bend National Park, the most isolated of America's national parks, receives over 300,000 visitors annually. People are still drawn by the silence, the isolation, the stark beauty that brought people long before life here could be comfortable. And fortunately for the Stillwells, visitors seeking comfort, food and drink, a tank of gas, a place to sit and chat or camp a while, often find themselves at the Stillwell store, just a few miles from the entrance to Big Bend National Park. Many visitors also stop by Halley's Hall of Fame Museum, which chronicles the life of the legendary Stillwell matriarch and her family. And until she passed away in 1997 at age 99, Halley could often be found greeting visitors on the porch in front of their store.
Now, what do we hear about Pancho Villa?
He was good to poor people, and he did a lot of good.
The times have changed, and it's just hard to make a living because of the droughts, and the price of cattle is so low. And so we just have to diversify, as our neighbors do. They have bunkhouses and take in hunters and people that want to ride and see the country.
We have started doing things like the tourism, the bird watching, the Indian caves and the pre-Indian caves and the campgrounds and things, taking the tourist out and showing them the different things that are in West Texas that maybe they can see a little bit closer than they can by going into the Big Bend National Park.
It costs a lot more to live out here because you have to get gas brought in. You have so far to drive anywhere for groceries. Some neighbors up the road from us, she had to start teaching school, and he has an outside job, and so they're both, they have their cattle. They had to sell a lot of them, and they have sheep and goats, but they had to get jobs because they couldn't afford just to live on the ranch. And they were homeschooling, and they had to take their kids to town. So that was a big change. So that's what a lot of people are doing, is going outside the ranch and getting jobs.
Yeah, you've got to do something else if you're going to ranch. Unless you're a big rancher and got maybe 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 head of cattle, then you can maybe make it pay off. But for a small rancher, you just can't do it. You need some oil wells to be a successful rancher.
We have 82,000 acres here, and our lease allows us to run 400 cows, but we're down to about 300 right now because of the drought. The country looks good, but we've been in about a 10-year drought.
Oh, whoa.
When you've got 80,000 acres of desert, it's extremely hard. If I had 80,000 acres somewhere else, you'd be running 2, 3, 4, 5,000 head of cattle. Big time ranching. This is a small time ranch. And you have to do everything in a big time way. The fences are huge, and the upkeep on the fences. When it rains out here, it rains big time, and the fences get washed out. The water gaps get washed out. I don't have a crew of 10 men. I have my 3 girls. And is it hard? Do I get mad? Yeah.
During the drought, we have to sell, and then when it rains, we buy back or grow out. But it usually takes about 100 acres per unit, a cow and a calf.
When people start buying back, then there's not very many cattle being sold and the market goes up. And so the trick is to try to stay in the cow business through the hard times, and then you can enjoy the good times. And that's what I keep telling them every day. It's going up. It's going to go up.
Not by preference, but out of necessity. Cattle raising has become a labor of love for the Stillwell family and their neighbors.
I say, there's got to be a better way. And then I go to looking around at all the different choices and different things I could, and I don't really see a better way. I see that it's a hard old life, anything way you choose, whether you live in town, you live close to town, it's a hard old way. And I've chose the way. The financial part is not as good, but the other parts that I like, getting up early in the morning in the sunrise or the sunset, gathering cattle, and it's what I like and I love, and apparently my wife has either loved me enough to stay with me or loved what we do, kind of like dating.
A combination of factors have made small-scale family ranching in the Big Bend a losing proposition. It can take 50 or more acres of this arid land to support just one cow. The access to expanses of free, unfenced grazing land was gone ages ago. And unlike many other western states, grazing on federal land in Texas is unheard of, simply because there's almost no federally held land in the state. A legacy of Texas history as a former republic. So while the work of ranching may not have changed all that much in the last century, the economics have.
We have the niceties. When we go home in a little while, we'll have an air conditioner. We'll go home to cold drinks and ice water and coolers, which are the 1990s. And I really wouldn't want to go back to the 1890s where I didn't have TV, air conditioning. But when you get out in this country, you're basically moved back 100 years ago. When we get on the horseback and the truck and trailer have gone as far as it can go, and we gather, like this morning, gathered 10,000 acres. We didn't get very many cattle. I think we ended up with about 30 head of cattle. But when you move out into there, you've moved back into the 1890s, and you do everything the way. There's no helicopters, there's no four-wheelers, there's none of that. It's just, you do it the way you've always done it.
But straddling this gap between timeless trade and the financial obligations of modern life is no small task.
Gasoline, electricity, vehicles, just everything is extremely high, and cow market isn't. That's the talk. That's the talk in all of the livestock community, is how long can the small rancher like Hallie Stillwell and the Stillwells and us and just from Mexico to Canada, most of it is small ranchers and farmers. And how long will we be willing to put up with not enough? How long will they be willing to put up with not enough? Because I think I'm to the age that I will put up with it, because that's all I know and all I'll ever want to know. But the young people are leaving the ranches and the farms by the droves and going to town and becoming doctors and lawyers and things that you can make money at. But sooner or later, people, I believe this, and I believe a lot of the rancher people believe it and farming people believe it, is sooner or later the cities will have to find out that where they're getting their food from, and it's from us.
I think really ranching is a thing of the past. Most of the big ranchers have broken up and sold to oil people with money, and they use it as a tax write-off and just for their own pleasure. But the little rancher like we are, there's very few of us left.
The state's population has almost doubled in the past 40 years, and development pressures are finally reaching this once remote section of the state. All of this means that as more residents, businesses, and wealthy weekend ranchers buy into the area, property values rise, and the tax burden for a family ranch, along with increasing costs of living and frequent droughts, can cancel out most any profit. Inheritance taxes, in fact, are cited as a major reason for ranches like the Stillwells being split up and sold off.
Mama decided about 20 years ago that in order to avoid the inheritance tax, that she needed to divide the ranch up amongst the three of us. And then she had, at that time, she had to live at least 5 years in order for it to not to pay inheritance tax. Isn't that right? And so that's when she decided to go ahead and divide it up.
Well, most of it is left outside of what my brother has sold to this Mr. Herman out of San Antonio. Dee Dee and I still got all of our part, and he's got a section and a half left. So he sold 6, 7 sections to Mr. Herman, and the rest of it's still intact.
Unfortunately, when ranch property splits up, it rarely comes back together again. And due to the natural limits of the land, smaller subdivided ranches are even less economically viable. So do their land sales mark the beginning of the end for the Stillwell Ranch?
It's good country. Our water's our biggest problem.
I've got about 70, 80 head here of cows and calves, and I see some way over there, one over there. I've been trying to get up to about 100 head. Maybe next year I'll have 100 to keep my heifer calves again. Oh, there's not any money in it, but of course that's all I've ever, been interested in, and that's what I'm gonna do when I retire, if the bank ever lets me retire.
I was taught from babyhood that land was precious, and to have land, own land. Don't leave the land, take care of the land. I can't dictate or run the future. The only thing I know is to teach my children the love of the land and hope that they'll teach their children, and their children will teach their children.
For the Stillwell family, whether or not to ranch is simply not an option. It's in their blood. If the past is any indication of the future, Hallie's descendants will be resourceful enough to hold on to some land and continue ranching.
Well, we've been selling some rock off the ranch to the contractors on a road job in the park for erosion control.
They don't take any rock out of the national park for their roads.
Like Mama says, we're selling the ranch rock at a time, looks like.
But she goes along with whatever we have to do to maintain the ranch.
A couple of letters here need you to mail.
Well, put them under the rock.
Okay.
It'll go off today.
Okay.
And here's your change.
Thank you.
We'll keep expanding as we have money. We don't like to go in debt for anything, but if we get a little money ahead, we'll improve and maybe do some other things. There are a lot of opportunities that if we just had the younger people here to carry them out. The rest of us are kind of getting too old to take on new challenges, but I'll certainly encourage the younger ones.
So what will the future bring? Will the younger generations carry on and keep the Stillwell Ranch alive?
One daughter has already moved here. The rest of them, as they retire, they'll come down here and do their thing, whatever it is. We don't know what will happen when we're gone. I have 5 children. Son has 2 and Guy has 2. And we'll let them worry about that.
Nobody makes a living ranching. So all our neighbors are all lawyers and things like that. So we went in the tourist business to supplement the ranch and keep it going. Because ranching is not very profitable, but it's a lot of fun. Hallie always says, if you can't do it one way, just turn around and do it another way.
It's exactly this never-say-quit spirit that has kept the Stillwells going through the darkest of days and the driest of years. Their adaptability and boundless hope have been crucial to the family's survival in the Big Bend. For often, just as the cattle ran out of grass to eat, just as the earth began to crack and the last well ran dry, their hope would be rekindled.
We just live in hopes, and we're all optimistic, and we know that it'll rain someday. It's hard for me to see the rain gauges, they're up so high, but it looked like at least 3/10 and maybe 4. It'll help. In fact, I can already see that hill greening up.
But there's another good one back over here that'll come this way.
While their lifestyle is changing and the future of their land may not be certain, one thing is certain about the Stillwell Ranch family. Just like the rugged mountains and desert plants that make up their country, they will endure.